where did that come from? We'll talk more about that situation in other skills, but right now I want to talk about the unseen forces that got you to that place. We all have opinions. They're thoughts that we have right on the tip of our tongue, ready whenever a debate opens up. We have them in the heat of the moment. Normally, we feel calm and in control of them because we examine them fairly regularly, but those opinions are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how we feel about things. See how easily that metaphor came out? Talking about icebergs, we use that all the time. The tip of the iceberg is what we're conscious of, and the iceberg, the rest of the iceberg, the majority of it, is out of our sight below the surface. Our minds are like that. The tip of our mental iceberg is everything that is on the tip of our tongue, everything we're consciously aware of. Underneath of the surface is much, much more. It's our lived experience, it's our childhood traumas, and it's the biases we're not even fully aware of. The best example of this for most people that I can think of is racism, right? I don't know many people who admit to being racist. It's an ugly trait. We all know it's out there, though, just under the surface. For some, it's conscious, but hidden away. But for most of us, their racist tendencies are unconscious. Here in Montana, we have a kind of a special variety found among people who live in places that don't have a lot of racial diversity. It's a racism that comes from a natural tendency to fear difference, fear the other. We see someone who appears different and strange to us, and we're naturally on our guard. We react with a subconscious racism that we might not even have been aware existed within us. The reactions we have to those subconscious feelings are called heat of the moment thoughts. As I said earlier, our conscious feelings are usually calm, cool, and collected. They rarely cause eruptions of anger the way our subconscious heat of the moment thoughts do. The skill of detecting icebergs is about gaining mastery of those portions of our subconscious that can lead us to the kinds of heat of the moment thoughts that can hurt us and others in our relationships. Another useful metaphor that I like to use, in a military context, since that's what I come from, is to that of a minefield. You can think of our subconscious feelings as buried mines. If we remain oblivious to them while moving through life, it's like walking through a minefield without a map. I think you know where I'm going with this. This skill is about making a map of our minefields so we don't blindly walk tripping mines all the time. Icebergs, or mines, are our core values. They're our deepest held beliefs. And we're often unaware of them because they're so deeply ingrained in us. We're also often ashamed of them, so we bury them deep, like racism. Sometimes they're beliefs we aren't ashamed of, but that are so ingrained in us that we forget that they exist until they run up against some sort of challenge to them. A good example, kind of right on the tip of everybody's experience right now, is the coronavirus pandemic. Let's just say that one of our core values is that the world is a dirty, disease-ridden place, and if you don't carefully tend to your personal hygiene, you're an incompetent, dangerous person. In pre-coronavirus days, that belief was probably running in the background at low level, not even thought about consciously. We'd go to the water fountain and we'd see somebody, put their mouth on the metal and it'd bug us, but probably wouldn't freak us out, send us running for the hills or screaming in their face. You washed your hands all the time. You covered your cough with your elbow. You applied hand sanitizer every time you got. You overlooked the less sanitary behavior of others because you believed you understood the real risks of infection. It still bugged you a little, but you overlooked it. Well, now coronavirus fears have thrown all that out of whack. Your subconscious fear of germs has come raging to the surface. A guy in your office coughs without covering his mouth right outside your cubicle, and you watch the spray just kind of fill the air. Boom, you're triggered, and you scream. You're screaming at him, and you're running to the other side of the room in fear. How could you keep that situation from becoming an exploding landmine that would potentially hurt your relationships or hurt people in your workplace? By examining your subconscious feelings closely. In resiliency training, we have a tool for this that we call the ATC model. The A is an activating event, something that happens that causes this chain of reaction in you. T is the heat of the moment thoughts that you have, those things that come from your icebergs off the tip of your tongue. And the C is the consequences of that, or how we react to that event. In the situation I just described, you might want to examine it using this model, and we have an actual tool for doing that in MRT training. If you did, you would ask yourself, how did this situation get started? The answer to that question is your activating event. You would not write down, this idiot almost killed us by being a disgusting jerk. You'd write, he coughed without covering his mouth. Okay, so you want to leave the emotion, leave your visceral reaction out of the activating event. You have to state it just like it's a fact, a matter-of-fact thing. Then you would look at the heat of the moment thought you had a result of that activating event. You might write, you're an idiot who almost killed us all by being a disgusting jerk. Then you look at the consequences that resulted from that thought. You screamed at him and you ran to the other side of the room. You then ask yourself, are my emotions and the reactions that are coming from them helping or harming this situation? Now, it's possible that he's running 104 fever and dripping with disease, but if he's not, then your reaction might not be helping. He probably feels terrible, and more likely your office mates think you're a weird germaphobe and they'll be walking on eggshells around you all the time. Obviously, that's a pre-work from home example. We're not typically in our offices with each other right now. Some people are, but I think you get my drift. That may not have been a great example, but it illustrates what I'm talking about. Now, hopefully we can do that for ourselves whenever there's a mismatch between our thoughts and our reaction to them. But what about when we don't? You might need a friend to help us do that. Here's a situation where we see how a bad friend and a good friend might react. Private Smith, let's imagine there's a guy named Private Smith. He just got back from a deployment 6 weeks ago, and he's sitting down to watch football on a Sunday afternoon with his son. His wife reminds him that the sink still is leaking and he needs to work on it. Smith thinks to himself, it's just a small leak, I'll fix it later. Then he gets enraged, gets in his wife's face and is like, WTF, back off. Gets really angry. Now, his activating event was his wife's reminder to fix the leak in the sink, right? What was his heat of the moment thought? Well, maybe Private Smith will do his own self-examination. Maybe he won't. But later on, he goes down to the brew pub and he's going to blow off some steam with his buddy. Now, first, let's talk about if his buddy was Private Bad Buddy. So he's not the most helpful. Then after that, we'll talk about what a good buddy would sound like. So let's imagine Smith's talking. He says, hey, man, I almost didn't get a chance to watch the game. Things got pretty ugly over here. My wife started harping on me about fixing the sink. Do you believe her? What's her problem? Bad buddy might react by saying, yeah, man, no kidding. She knows Sunday's your big football day. Then his follow-on question to your reaction to that might be, hey, man, it's just one day of the week. She should really let up. Don't you have a long honey-do list besides that? So connecting it with some other offense that he perceives. And then next follow-on question might be, why didn't she get your son to do it? Is she babying him? So starts attaching other grievances to the situation. So that's a bad buddy. I want you to notice that in that situation, the bad buddy is asking a bunch of why questions. He's being this sort of devil's advocate, erring on the side of the little devil on your shoulder instead of the angel, maybe. And his reaction just justifies Private Smith's reaction, reinforces it. You think Private Smith is likely to modify his heat of the moment thoughts after that conversation? Like he's going to come home and have examined the situation in a more healthy way? It's probably pretty unlikely. Now, let's say he went down and he met Private Good Buddy instead. So the conversation might go something like this. Smith says, hey, I almost didn't get a chance to watch the game. Things got pretty ugly over here. My wife started harping on me about fixing the sink. Do you believe her? What's her problem? Good Buddy might say something like, man, that's rough. So he's showing compassion, showing empathy. And then he'd have a follow-up question like, what was the worst part of that whole situation for you? He turns the attention on Private Smith. Following question that might be, well, assuming that's true, that she understands how you feel about the football game, what's so upsetting about that to you? So it peels back the onion a little bit more. Another follow-on question from that might be, well, assuming she harps on the one thing you haven't done, what does that mean to you? So again, another layer. And finally, what's the worst part about her not appreciating you? And then again, another follow-on question. Assuming it's true that she doesn't respect you, being that that was Private Smith's reaction, doesn't respect who you are as a husband and father, what does that mean to you? Okay, so that might elicit a little bit deeper examination on the part of Private Smith, right? He might really get to the heart of his own feelings as a husband and father and how he's valued, and that was the tip of the tongue thought that he had that triggered this consequence, not that he was in the middle of watching his football game. First, notice that Good Buddy is asking what questions instead of why questions, like Bad Buddy was. They get to the heart of the icebergs and help him recognize them. They get the issues out of himself and put them on the table in front of him to examine. With each question, he peels back the layers further until he gets to the root of the mismatch between Private Smith's thoughts and what came out of his wife, or out of his mouth to his wife. This is likely to be helpful to him in his relationship with his wife. It'll also enhance the friendship between Good Buddy and Private Smith too, because it helps to build trust, right? It might not be in the very moment where he has that, help Private Smith come to that maybe uncomfortable self-awareness, but I think it would contribute in the long run to the friendship. Okay, so you've detected an iceberg, or you've probed and you found a buried mine. What now? Ask yourself a few questions. Do I still value this core belief, or is it overly rigid? Some of our beliefs, we've tested them. They've come from places that we felt were good and nourishing and that they should be maintained. But it's still important to be aware of them and not to just blindly live with them without any self-examination. Then you ask yourself, is it getting in the way of me having good relationships with others? Look at your social circle, look at your family. You might believe in them completely, but beating your head against a wall to get them across to the people around you might be destructive, and those relationships may be even more important to you than those core beliefs. What should I do to change the core beliefs if they are destructive to my relationships? What are things I can do to change my reactions to these kinds of events? Okay, so you may hold on to those core beliefs, but you may recognize that your reactions, the consequences that come from those thoughts that they're triggered by, might be counterproductive. And so you need to take a look at how you react and gauge that a little bit. Do we need to have a conversation with someone to get to the heart of the disconnect? Not everybody's going to be equipped to do that level of self-examination. So that's where the Good Buddy type guy or gal is going to be of great value to us. It's going to help us peel back the onions and overcome resistance that we might have to that self-examination. When we've gone through this process, we get to what we like to call the aha moment. All right. We get to it when we have a clear line between our beliefs and the consequences that come from the thoughts that are triggered. All of this becomes aware. We become aware of it, and we feel in control of the situation. So that's the point of this, is to get us to that point. Now, another skill that you'll talk about in MRT is thinking traps, and icebergs can often lead to thinking traps. These are situations we find ourselves in over and over. I often refer to those as my blind spots. They're core beliefs that I have that are pretty much fixed, and I know that situations come up in pretty much day-to-day life that trigger them, that cause this. So it requires you to do the self-examination to be aware of your blind spots, just like in a car, just where that term comes from. Be looking in your mirror, checking your mirrors, making sure that you're not surprised by a situation that triggers that. Always remember to ask yourself or ask others, if you're in the Good Buddy situation, what instead of why questions. That's really an important thing. Be the devil's